This is the Outskirts Podcast with Tanner and friends. And in this episode, we present to you another installment of interesting interviews, by which we facilitate discussions with people who we find interesting because of their experiences, areas of expertise, or points of view which may or may not align with our own. Please enjoy this interview with a very interesting person, the Honorable Alan B. Clark. Warning. Themes and content addressed in this episode delve deeply into the realm of alternate history. The writings and opinions expressed herein are representative of our guest's worldview, which it is our privilege to ponder. This episode is rife with political ideation and may cause extreme discomfort in those susceptible to emotional discombobulation resulting from exposure to opinions and or facts which conflict with or undermine their own understandings. If this is you, please, just skip this one. We'll still be friends. Here we go. Today on the Outskirts Podcast with Tanner and friends, we're pleased to welcome our new friend, the Honorable Alan B. Clark.
I'm delighted to be your guest today. Thank you.
Mr. Clark, you graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1963. In 1966, you volunteered for service as an Army intelligence officer in Vietnam, where for your service, you were awarded the Silver Star, a Purple Heart, and the Combat Infantryman's Badge. Your political service began in 1979 when you served as a special assistant to Texas Governor Bill Clements. Between 1989 and 1993, you served in the presidential administration of George H.W. Bush as the Assistant Secretary for Veterans Liaison and Program Coordination, and Director of the National Cemetery System in the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Endorsers of your character and of the heroic life you've lived include Bob Dole, Ross Perot, Ronald Reagan, Congressman Allen B. West, to name a few of many. You have authored 3 books, Valor in Vietnam, Wounded Soldier, Healing Warrior, and most recently, Soldier's Blood, Bloodied Money. On June 17, 1967, you were wounded in an enemy mortar barrage. Are you comfortable talking about the days leading up to that?
Yeah, it's so far ago, and it's part of my story. It's a vivid part of my story, so I don't mind talking about it and what happened and what it led to and how my life was significantly changed that day. My first wife wanted me to resign from the Army, so I had to make a choice. The choice I made, Tanner, was that I cannot avoid, evade, miss Vietnam. That was the quintessential historical event happening from my class group from West Point, late 50s into that period in 67. 66. I could not do that. So I volunteered without telling my wife. I was sent to a special forces camp in the spring of 67 as an intelligence officer. I was put undercover at infantry brass, infantry assignment, a false name, a false ID, and lived up there in the special forces camp where we had about 12 special forces, a few other Americans, to the total of 25 Americans and about 300 Montagnards, as we call the native people in the area, or South Vietnamese Special Forces team themselves. And a North Vietnamese Communist Regular Army Battalion had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail that spring, positioned themselves in one of those privileged sanctuaries across the border. They started moving into our area. They ambushed 2 patrols in mid-June and killed 2 out of 3 Americans in the first ambush, perhaps killed all 4 Americans that sent out to retrieve the bodies in the second one. And so they were moving in on us. My operation was basically shut down. And I was to be taken out of the camp at 9:30 Saturday morning, June 17th, 1967, by my commanding officer from Saigon, 280 miles away. And he was coming in, he says, Alan, we communicate by radio. It's not like you get on your cell phone back then or telephone, communicate by by coded messages back and forth. I'm going to pick you up, obviously behind the scenes. My mission was over in that area because there would be no agents going out into a heavily infiltrated enemy country. So I was going to leave at 9:30 that morning. I had a 4 to 6 shift in the camp, every 2-hour shift in a special forces camp at night. An American is on duty in the inner perimeter, so an attack started at 4:30 during my shift. At 6, I would have been off shift. I would have gone back and packed a duffel bag, which is all you carry around in Nam, and gotten my rifle and my personal effects, which were very minimal, and then got on an airplane at 9:30 that my commanding officer would come to pick me up. Mortar attack starts at 4:30, and I began to do the kinds of things that you just kind of do. You grab guys and send them to mortar pits to put counter battery fire on where you expect the enemy positions to be. And I had spotted them like all of us had the night before because of some movements that right at dusk the night before, and also getting flares up into the air in case there was an expected ground attack. There was not. But in the course of that, bam, I'm thrown on my stomach, my front, mortar round hit to my left rear.
Were you evacuated immediately?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any memory of the evacuation?
Everything, every intimate detail. One of the great things about it, Tanner, is the Lord, I guess, put me in shock because I recall and recollect no pain. The left leg was gone. I had mortar shrapnel pellets in my thighs and in my arm also. And the right leg was broken in 5 places. One Green Beret medic got to me very quickly to stop the blood flow. So that medic plus another Special Forces sergeant had come to me and put me on a litter. And I was on my stomach, so I didn't know what had happened. We started down into the bunker with the team, the 12-man Special Forces team. It was kind of a 90-degree turn into the bunker. And I remember pushing off to try to help me get down there. And then I got down there, and then Green Beret medic Jimmy Hill began to take care of me. I still didn't know what had happened. And he went out under fire, apparently, and got some morphine and plasma. I still never felt any pain because by the time he got back, gave me morphine, I was okay. And I was lucid, Tanner. That's the amazing thing. I told the medic, and I don't know why I was so magnanimous and generous, but I told the medic, Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, treat the others before you treat me. And he said, don't worry, Captain, I'll take care of you. So he didn't take me up on that. Later, after I'd been medevac, meaning taken out by chopper with the other wounded, he treated 70 other people. And he had taken a piece of shrapnel in his shoulder when he started up to help me, when he heard me yelling. And he got knocked back into the bunker. So he has a piece of shrapnel in his left shoulder. And the other thing I said to him was, tell my wife, my first wife, Jackie, back here in the United States, tell her what happened because I know I'm going to die. And he said, Captain, you're not going to die. I'm not going to let you die. He said, it's not your time. I found out later, Tanner, in conversations we've kept in touch all these years, told me I was his first combat casualty because he'd just gotten in country the week before. And I joked with him when I heard that. I said, Jimmy, if I'd known that, I'd have asked for a second opinion. Anyway, he did take care of me. And there were 25 Americans in the camp. 2 were killed. One was sitting right next to me on the floor next to my cot where I'd been placed by Jimmy Hill on his cot in his bunker. And 8 others besides me were wounded. So we took very, very heavy casualties out of 25 Americans. So I woke up Sunday night, 2 full days later, and I'd been taken into the Pleiku Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, what they call MASH. There was a television series called MASH in the Korean War. Well, I was in the MASH there, and I found out an interesting thing Sunday night, the second night. The chaplain came to my bed, and the chaplain related to me that the hospital didn't have enough supply of my type A negative blood. I don't know how they did it, whether they sent out a broadcast or word of mouth, but apparently 20 to 25 Air Force people at the air base where we were, or at the Special Forces camp, came in and donated A negative blood. So I was just overwhelmed that I'd lost that much blood, number one, but number two, that I had been saved by all my fellow warriors coming in to help me. I told the chaplain, I said, I'd like to thank them all. And he says, Captain, you don't need to worry about that. He says, we Americans take care of each other, which I have always remembered all these years, which is very poignant. And then I went to another hospital on the coast, Quignon, for those that know the history, the geography of Vietnam, and then Clark Air Force Base, which is now closed in the Philippines, and then Hawaii, and then San Francisco, and then El Paso, and then finally to San Antonio. So like every 24 hours, the plane would land, and I guess we were taken into a hospital there just overnight and treated, and then back on the plane, and I got off. And my then wife, amazingly enough, she had received a telegram at the door, and this is one of those amazing stories that happens to us, Tanner, in the military. She went to the door, and I guess it was I don't know if it was a telegram deliverer or mail. And the fella, before he handed her the message, he said, "Are you alone? Oh, do you have anyone with you?" Because she lived with her parents while I was gone. And she yelled out, "Is he alive? Is he alive?" She began to panic, and she got the telegram, and her mother ran to the door. And so the fellow, whoever delivered it, left, and she, in fact, opened it and said, "Your husband has been very seriously wounded, VSI, very seriously injured in Vietnam." And that's about all it said. And they gave her a contact at the Pentagon in Washington to call up to get any further details. So she immediately went into a very, very deep shock and had to have a doctor give her a sedative, And she called the number at the Pentagon. Says, this telegram says VSI, very seriously injured. What does that mean? Says, and the guy at the Pentagon says, well, he could die any minute. And then she wants to ask him some more questions. And he says, excuse me, ma'am, I have to go to lunch.
Hello, Pentagon Department Veteran Liaison. This is Willie McAdoo. How can I help you? I understand. It's like, hey, Jimmy, VSI? Yeah. Ma'am. Yeah, he could die any minute. Yeah. No. Hello. Hey, listen, I'm on my lunch break. I'm gonna have to be back with you. Thanks.
Think about that. Think about how gross and horrible that is to an Army wife whose husband has been wounded, getting that. I mean, that's how they treated us back during the Vietnam War, just horrific. So anyway, that started 15 months of hospitalization, multiple surgeries through the years. Well, starting there and then afterwards also.
You said your right leg was broken in quite a few places.
Yeah, and they took it off 10 days later also. The doctor came to my bed and he said, Captain, he said, you're going to, obviously we're going to fit you with an artificial leg eventually on your left leg. But he said, you'll walk better, amazingly enough, with two artificial legs than one in this gimp leg, which can be very gimpy. So, what are you going to do? You're getting morphine every 3 hours, and you have to make a decision. What am I going to say? Well, I'll do that rather than take the other one off. Who knows, whatever. I didn't want to, I probably would have had to have it taken off months later and gone through the whole process again.
Yeah.
So I continued to have different, what they call revisions. I had both my legs were open below the knee. They had to take skin off my stomach, and they had to take a bone out of my rib. So I have a missing rib about 3 or 4 inches, and they put a piece of bone at the bottom of each of my stumps, and then the skin they took off and they stretched and they covered it eventually, but it took weeks and weeks and weeks to get the legs covered. And in the meantime, they would go in and continue to take out pellets. It was just horrible time, very painful. Even if they gave you morphine, you could still feel that kind of picking away at getting the little pieces of shrapnel out of your wounds. So those were the initial several months situation. Yeah, the left leg is a little bit longer below the knee, but the right was very short, as we call it, stump. The doctors like to call them residual limbs. We amputees just call them stumps.
Wow. The trauma. I mean, for everyone, just imagining your family, the whole scenario is just it's just a horrifying thing.
It was not an easy time. I had very, very tough time emotionally, Tanner. Um, I did not realize it, but a psychiatrist would drop in on me once in a while, see how I was, and I guess outwardly, I did not evidence significant aspects of post-traumatic stress immediately, but he began having the nursing staff put in my pills that I got every day, something I guess to quiet me down and pacify me, the typical antidepressant. I didn't realize that was there, but I began to evidence really being scared about my future and what I was going to do as a double leg amputee and what my life would be like. And I had begun to really be fearful. Now, I had been raised, quote, a Christian, as many of us are. Go to church, you go to Sunday school, and so forth. And so I had head knowledge of Jesus the Christ, but I really didn't have heart knowledge, as I would call it, which is what I needed. I didn't have that at the time. And I kind of progressed along on my own, and did the best I could to attain emotional and spiritual stability. I did allow the attacks of what I consider the evil one to get to me, fear, frustration, all the different emotions that get to us. And it really began to get to me. I got mad at God and, why me? And then I began to, as I speak today, I tell people, look, the choice of actions causes consequences for us. So when we have issues in life that are bothersome to us, that are troublesome to us, that are agonizing to us, that are bad for us, we need to think back. What caused me to be in this position? Am I to blame personally? Well, yes. If we wanted to blame anybody, it wasn't God. At that time, it was Alan Clark. I made a choice.
Well, thank you for sharing that part of your life history and the journey through recovery. So you're in your eighth decade.
I'm in my ninth decade
You're in your ninth decade. Okay.
because I'm 80.
You're 80 years old. Okay.
Yeah, I'm 81 on June 20th.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Um, so you retired from political service and then you continued as a public speaker and author with focus on helping people, veterans specifically, to recover from PTSD. Um, would it be correct to say that in your latest book, Soldier's Blood and Bloodied Money, that you incorporate an anti-war ideology into that body of work that helps vets to cope with not just trauma of war, but the injustice of war, the burden of which is most often carried by the men and women who are called upon to fight those wars?
Yeah. What I have put in that book is really kind of a history of warfare all the way back to the coming of the Christ. And through the years, the satanic forces of spiritual warfare have really always been there. And I'm a proponent of what we read in the Bible, that there was an entity in heaven also that got a little bit too big for his britches, and was Lucifer at the time, became Satan down here, or the dragon down here, and brought with him 1/3 of the then angel population. And I am of the opinion that has comprised, and I write about this, an eternal struggle between good and evil, God versus the devil. And that's what I call spiritual warfare at the broader strategic level. And then at the tactical level, which is individual for us, the tactical level is a fight every day of our lives for infiltration by those demonic spirits to take us over. Now, their power, Tanner, to take us over relates to openings or doorways of evil. That means that if we have unconfessed sin, or if we have unforgiveness to others, that there is an opening that the demon spirit will work us over for our weaknesses. and our vulnerabilities and be able to get into us and cause us to lose track of what is a good spiritual life. Now, through the years, through the decades, and through the centuries for sure, I believe that for the purposes of satisfaction of greed and power and getting something from others and making money, that there has been an infiltration, significant infiltration at the strategic level, which I write about people of means, people of power, royalty, people in government, you name it out there, that have proceeded with the opportunities to foster and foment warfare. And I write about that. I know people dispute conspiracy theory of history, but the fact is, I've studied so-called conspiracy theory of history. It is history, period. And I've written about that. And I've written about this eternal conflict with very specific enumeration and examples of the casualties, how badly we who have fought the wars have hurt, and also who has made money off those wars and what's the background economically, financially, politically, behind the scenes that has fostered and fomented those wars. And I cover 4 wars: the American Revolution, Civil War, Spanish American, and what I call the Banana Wars in the Central Americas.
I have read the book. You described it perfectly. It's just so full of history where you're quoting other authors, other researchers, laying out facts, and it's really riveting and kind of mournful. I'm reading it mournfully as the curtain's pulled back on the players. You have a section titled Players and Consequences. So I've taken a lot of notes here, and I've got quite a few questions that I'm going to kind of take them out of order here, but we could just talk about bankers to begin with. Do you have a copy of your book on hand?
Yeah, let me go over and get it, and I'll turn to the pages if you want to look up the pages.
Okay. David Rockefeller, and I've heard this is quoted across the landscape of, as you say, conspiracy theorists, where there's this implication of a secret cabal, right? And people raise their eyebrows at that or scoff at it even. But this speech is one that's often referred to where he admits to the existence of a cabal that he is part of.
Well, yeah, he said, I have been accused of this. Well, he says yes. He says yes. Kind of an interesting sidelight with the Rockefellers. I went to a prep school called Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire for my junior year in high school. And I was, we were assigned tables. The next table over, David Rockefeller, the banker son, was at the table next to me. I never knew him, never said a word to him. He was a senior graduating in 59, and I graduated originally class of 60, but I left after 11th grade to go to West Point. So I'm a high school dropout. But anyway, that Rockefeller was there. Kind of an interesting thing.
Wow.
Interesting part of history, my personal history.
You did a great job discussing the relationship between bankers and industrialists and weapons manufacturers. You quote Thomas Jefferson, who, in a letter to John Taylor, he says, I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies.
Yeah, well, what I've discovered through history is that, the Rothschilds, for crying out loud, they lent to both sides. They didn't care. Money is money, interest is interest, and that's what they live by, and so forth. So they don't take sides. They didn't then. They're powerful enough, and bankers in our country would not have lent to the Germans during the war, but we had institutions in the United States that before World War II, they were helping to build Germany back up. Now, one of the reasons that a lot of our people felt that they needed to help Germany was because we were afraid of the communists, and so we'd rather support the Nazis in the 30s rather than the communists. But they were both bad. I mean, of course, the communists started out being partners with the Nazis in World War II, but then very quickly broke away. And then, of course, Germany tried to fight on 2 fronts, and that was a big mistake. And they really got wiped out by the Russians very quickly on the Eastern Front, and then, of course, by us with the D-Day invasion. But back to the original question, of course, bankers make money, and they have, because, they lend. And so, and then the munitions makers. I mean, here's a classic example today. We are being very, very generous with Ukraine, and we're sending millions and millions and billions of dollars to them to an extent that exceeds the defense budget of many, many countries, the complete annual budget of many, many countries. Now, when bombs and bullets and tanks and weapons and artillery are sent from us to them, those stockpiles need to be replaced. So today, the military industrial complex, the defense contractors, they get new contracts. So those things, we don't have our own war going on. In a way, we do have a proxy war against Russia for sure in Ukraine, but they're making money. I mean, Afghanistan, what purpose did we have, national purpose to be served in Afghanistan? We blamed the attack on the World Trade Center on Osama bin Laden. So we went immediately, within about a month, sent our special forces into Afghanistan. And that began, 20-year war? I mean, endless wars.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. We are joined in this operation by our staunch friend, Great Britain. Other close friends, including Canada, Australia, Germany, and France, have pledged forces as the operation unfolds. More than 40 countries in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and across Asia have granted air transit or landing rights. Many more have shared intelligence. We are supported by the collective will of the world.
What is our ultimate questions for warfare? Number one, is there a national purpose to be served? And then number two, what is the end result? How are we going to achieve that end result for our benefit? In the 20-year war in Afghanistan, what was it? And then what we have the withdrawal the way we did, for crying out loud, that really burns up a lot of military people. What was it all worth? And then I don't even want to get into the change of administrations after the Kennedy assassination in '63 to Johnson, because Kennedy wanted to withdraw our troops from Vietnam completely and totally under National Security Action Memorandum of 263. As soon as Johnson came into office, bingo, we were off and running for a war from '63 to 10-year war. Once again, what was the end result? So in the meantime, bases got built in Vietnam, made a lot of revenue for construction companies, bombs, bullets. A lot of money was spent on the defense contractors. And what the heck? We got kicked out anyway. We lost anyway. Communists took over the entire South. The Taliban has taken over Afghanistan. I mean, so what was it all worth for us to have lost our lives and all the pain and sorrow and suffering? And I didn't go into those wars in this book because that would have been a future volume, which I so far chosen, Tanner, not to subject myself to the concentration and time it would have taken to do another one.
Well, you've done a great job with this one. So on the subject of selling those wars to the people, you quote Diana Spingola, and I'll read it here.
What page is that?
I'm sorry, this is page 137.
Got it.
And then I have some things I want to talk about that I've just gleaned from pop culture and my own experience in Afghanistan. So she says, the international bankers who profit most from warfare have controlled the entertainment and documentary media for decades. Yeah. She says, media moguls, often in conjunction with the Pentagon, produce movies that glorify war. And I read that, and they're just a whole host of movies that I can bring to mind. World War II movies, movies that do just that. They glorify war, and they that's not to say that the men who fight these wars, I can understand, like, they have my heart and you have my heart. And these men who are out there risking their lives, on the one hand, I'd say, yes, they are worthy of our admiration and so much. But there's something else that's attached. And is the word jingoism?
Yeah, jingoism, and Mark Twain brought that up and spoke that relative to the Spanish-American War. That was one of his words. It's jingoism that gets us revved up for warfare
Yeah.
psychologically.
And so Deanna Spingola, she says that the Pentagon has been actively producing movies and content with the specific goal, basically, of fostering that jingoism in the population.
Yeah.
And then I think back to, I guess it was like the end of the 90s, there was a movie called Wag the Dog,
Yeah, yeah.
which seemed to be kind of an expose uh, on that type of behavior, right? Where you had, I think that was an Oliver Stone film. I don't know. It seems like something he would make at least, but he was just exposing. Basically, it was a play on the whole Clinton Lewinsky debacle, where in order to divert attention from a political nightmare, they created this war, a fictitious war, I guess. But they enlisted the likes of Willie Nelson to write a song, and the whole movie was just about how they sold this idea to the American people. And things like that are always puzzling to me, where there are these things that happen in the real world, and our government is perpetrating these things. So if the Pentagon through projects like Operation Mockingbird or whatever it is, they're playing both ends, right? It's
Yeah.
like they're revealing the methodology on one hand, and then years later, they're actually carrying it out in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
When I was in Afghanistan, Willie Nelson actually did write a song about going to war. It was the Beer for My Horses song. It was released on April 7th, 2003. And 2 days later, we captured Baghdad on April 9th.
The safety of America depends on the outcome of the battle in the streets of Baghdad. Osama bin Laden calls this fight the Third World War. And he says that victory for the terrorists in Iraq will mean America's defeat and disgrace forever. If we yield Iraq to men like bin Laden, our enemies will be emboldened. They will gain a new safe haven. They will use Iraq's resources to fuel their extremist movement. We will not allow this to happen.
Of course, after having invaded Iraq on false pretenses.
Yeah.
And the timing was just like, I don't know what to think about it really. Where Willie Nelson portrayed himself doing the thing he actually did, just 6 years later
Yeah.
in that movie.
Well, by the way, I want to digress here, and I want to thank you as a fellow veteran for serving your country and going off to war zone. I appreciate that very much, Tanner, on your own behalf.
Well, thank you for saying so. And of course, I appreciate your service, and your service to truth here in this book has really been exciting for me. I just have pages and pages of notes. I've been really revved up by the material that you've written here.
Thank you for that compliment.
So that issue, the idea that the government is producing media for the public to consume, that will inspire in us a sympathy to their agenda. That might be okay if their agenda weren't motivated by greed, right? I guess there are times when it's necessary to inspire a collective patriotism in the context of national defense.
There's a concept, Tanner, about a just war, theologically, just war and unjust wars. Now, the question is, when we start to go to war, is it a just war or not? Now, that's the big question about Ukraine. I mean, is it related to a purpose for Putin, as an example, for Russia to be concerned about Ukraine being right next door to them, and on the eastern side having a lot of real Russians, original Russians ethnically, and being concerned that if they get into NATO, that we will position nuclear weapons or whatever in Ukraine. And so he wanted to go against that. Now, what that has done positively for the free world and the allies is Finland and Sweden are worried about their sovereignty and being next to Russia. And that's why they probably will come in and be admitted to NATO. So his side of the story as to whether it's a just war or not relates to that. And then Ukraine, are they just protecting their sovereignty? It has been a significant source of money laundering and human trafficking. So, I've heard extensive stories that there has been biolabs in that country the other side of the story, does it make sense to send these billions of dollars for warfare in there with no real accountability in many cases? So therefore, you have people profiting from the war in that country and pocketing money because we're not accounting for everything that's going in. We're apparently paying pensions to their people, when we have all our own financial issues and challenges in our country. So somebody's making money off that. I mean, in that case, it's our defense contractors, obviously, that replenish supplies, but also those corrupt individuals in the government and the establishment in Ukraine, much less the little people getting killed. The poor
300,000 Ukrainians, is that right? I've heard
Oh,
300, upwards of
well,
300,000
oh,
Ukrainians.
oh yeah, it's just horrifying to think about the troops on the front lines and the families that will never know what happened to their individuals, and have left the country and have gone into Poland and the countries around Ukraine. It's just the eternal worldwide struggle. Back to that, Tanner. Good versus evil, strategic warfare.
But yet, if you turn on the TV or whatever your news outlet is, there's, by and large, you can see people in support of this war.
Yeah.
And the rhetoric that's coming through the media outlets is either very much in favor or at a minimum, maybe they're just kind of avoiding the topic. But there aren't really many strong voices in opposition to this that I've heard. There again, they're controlling the narrative. Do you think that the influence that the Pentagon has over media is more widespread with regards to propagandist material than it has been historically? With the internet, is it even maybe more of an issue now?
Well, the more you get more information from a variety of sources with the internet today, and in a way you kind of get overwhelmed. I mean, um, my wife and I watch a lot of documentaries and interviews on YouTube, and we get to a certain point, we get overwhelmed, and then there is so much bad news in our own country of things that are happening that we just need to turn it off and go to the series, the TV series Touched by an Angel, which is credit tremendous stories, back in the 90s.
Yeah, I remember that show. That's some enlightening, uplifting stuff.
Oh
I
yeah.
think we could all be served with some Touched by an Angel.
Tanner, in the paragraph just above what we quoted about Deanna Spingola, I read this book by Dr. R.E. Search. Must be a false name. We call it nom de guerre, 1935. And my nom de guerre was Copley in Vietnam, by the way, rather than Clark. He says, I had found my own enlightenment and conviction that the desire for money, together with the power it carries with its possession and its uses and abuses, had been at the very foundation of most of the world's greatest crimes, tragedies, and murders of many ages and nations, causing the fall of one civilization after another, right down to the present time. That was written 5 years before World War II. I found all these incredible quotes about opinions about this thesis of mine and corroborating my thesis.
Yeah.
I was just
But
so delighted that, oh, wow, things that I'm thinking, these other people have thought about. So, I put it all together in my
yeah,
book.
that's it is encouraging when your convictions and for me just the limited reading I've done, you find historical writers affirming the way you've interpreted the Bible or the things that guide your worldview. On 139, talking about the nature of money, there's a quote from an author, E.C. Newth. You quoted him pretty extensively. And describing the nature of money, he says, it's said that only a few dozen men in the world know the nature of money. And therefore, these few men are allowed to practice the manipulation of money and of that mysterious commodity known as credit, as a mystic right. So to me, I read that and it reminded me of what I interpret the Bible's position on usury to be, right?
Yeah.
The lending of money at interest. Um, and this kind of implies that there is a spiritual nature to the mystery of usury, right? To the manipulation of money and credit.
Well, there's a
And
spiritual nature behind everything, Tanner, everything. but especially money. Yeah. And interest.
Yeah. That's kind of a
But we'll
spiritual
see.
evil
Yeah.
that's
If you go,
inherent in our monetary system.
yeah, and if you go halfway down, it's even more than that, and cause gigantic bloodshed in which the people must sacrifice their lives to protect the manipulators from the fury of those nations and peoples who have been their victims. See, that's what I focus on is the warfare casualties. So many of these are manipulators, and they're really atheists. If they had a true belief in our Lord and the peace that the Lord Jesus Christ tried to bring the ideas for in our society 2,000 years ago, if they truly believe that, they would seek ways to stop wars rather than initiate it. But I believe, Tanner, that there are a lot of sociopaths in power positions, and they're reflective of the evil side of humanity. A sociopath knows the difference between right and wrong, and he or she is okay with the wrong side. That makes them a sociopath. Yeah.
And so I understand how you might perceive that most sociopaths would be atheists because if there's ultimately no accountability after death or even in life, right? If there's no good is as a subjective idea, good and bad, right? Without a sort of a moral lawgiver who
Yeah.
transcends us,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a free for all.
Sure.
Anything goes, I guess.
You don't have a basic set of principles by which you guide your life. Values. Values.
Yeah.
Newth writes about the late Vincent Cartwright Vickers. Vickers was a very powerful man, very well connected in England. And he quotes Cartwright, who'd been in business, he'd been in banking. I mean, he just touched all the major places and levers of influence in England. Wrote about the power of controlling the markets of the world, and loans to foreign countries are organized and arranged by the city of London with no thought whatsoever of the nation's welfare, but solely in order to increase indebtedness upon which the city of London, the banking center, thrives and grows rich.
Yeah. And then he finishes that statement. He says, "Today we see through a glass darkly, for there is so much that would not be in the public interest to divulge." But he was just basically implying then that the public didn't have any means to react appropriately to that type of information, I
Well,
guess.
he just confirms that there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes in these power centers.
What can you tell me about the author Carol Quigley?
Well, Quigley
Who,
was an amazing guy. Quigley was a professor at Georgetown University, and I think it's possible that he was a professor that taught President Clinton back then, and he has written extensively. He's got a very, very thick book. Um, the name of his book is called Tragedy and Hope, 1974. I read it many, many years ago. Somehow or other misplaced my copy. I rebought another copy. It was that important with everything that he had to say and how he analyzed warfare and banking and a variety of things. And he's what some people would say, he's a conspiracy theorist. Well, it's not conspiracy theory. It's true, you know. And intelligence organizations like to throw out that, we got to be careful about conspiracies because sometimes they are part and parcel of the conspiracies themselves. So they
right.
would rather conspiracies that are out there, don't listen to them. They can't be true.
That seems to be the obvious way that you would handle it, right? Isn't
Yeah, dispute it.
I've heard it said that the CIA created that term conspiracy theory to avoid dealing with people who had questions about Kennedy assassinations.
Exactly.
Would you just read this quote on page 141 where Quigley summarizes the overall effect of bankers? It's
Um,
the second paragraph on
Yeah,
page
the
141.
history the history of the last century shows, as we shall see later, that the advice given to governments by bankers, like the advice they gave to industrials, was consistently good for bankers, but was often disastrous for governments, businessmen, and the people generally.
Wow, what a summary.
And he wrote that. Remember, he wrote that book 50 years ago.
Yeah. Let's see. Jumping back over here on 140. He talks about The goals. The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. That's quite a goal.
Yeah. Well,
And
I think today very few people know about this Bank for International Settlements, which is also referenced in my book as the central bank of the central banks. And there's a movement going on, and it's going to start in July here. The central bank digital currency, and
I,
American citizens need to be aware of that.
I was going to ask you about that.
Bank for International Settlements. There was a quote that I found that it's in here somewhere. I don't know what page it is. That during World War II, there was a conversation between the president of the Bank for International Settlements, based in Basel, Switzerland, and a Nazi, trying to decide after the war what was going to happen to over $300 million worth of assets in the Bank for International Settlements that was sent there by the Germans, so the Nazis, so that they could be protected. And I believe that's what was used by Nazis after the war to establish economic and financial control and further movement toward a Fourth Reich after the war, and how much the Operation Paperclip that all these German Nazis came to the United States after World War II to help us scientifically, and the Russians got their share of the scientists also that helped us develop a lot of our weaponry, as a matter of fact. That really bothered me. While American troops were dying in Europe, the Nazis were still concerned, very much so concerned, about what was going to happen to the assets they had taken from banks that they had taken in overrun countries, and also money that they'd taken from the Jews from possession of their assets in Europe. Wow. That really bothered me. That one really bothered me.
Closing up this chapter on banking, I'm looking on page 152, the last paragraph you've written, and just let me know if you don't want to talk about this.
Yeah, I got it here.
I saw that interview also.
Yeah. That's an amazing interview, isn't it?
It is amazing. I don't have the knowledge where I can make the correct associations with what he's saying in regards to banking. I'm not as far read, and I don't really understand how these systems work. But just listening to him talk about his experience in that social setting.
He's either an extraordinary actor who should get an Oscar, or he truly felt and believed what he had experienced. One or the other. I presume that his display of emotion was deeply felt and experienced truthfully.
It was obviously immensely disturbing. I'll go ahead and mention his name, I guess. Ronald Bernard.
Yeah, that's on. If they haven't taken it off,
Hi, Ronald. Our team has reviewed your content, and unfortunately, we think it violates our hate speech policy. Pardon? Wow. We don't allow any content that encourage hatred of another person or group of people. We removed the following content from your YouTube channel. The use of child sacrifice was the voiceover version. It's the English spoken version who went viral and changes many people's lives worldwide. Sorry, I don't hate people. I have dealt with this many years. I'm over it. Hate poisons yourself. It's not the way. But of course, you're right. I mention people. People who are Satanists. People who molest children, people who kill children. Someone has to say it. Someone has to testify about it.
That definitely kind of connects the dots as far as spiritual influence and the corruption present in banking. It implies more than an atheism, doesn't it? That
Well, it's the ultimate expression of the it's the ultimate expression in our society of the baser nature of behavior and belief and propagation of that in the world and against people and for themselves.
So do you think there are those who participate in such activities that do so just on a philosophical principle, like you're saying? They're just acknowledging that they give themselves over to these baser instincts and that there's
Well,
not a spiritual element. They're not serving Lucifer
yeah,
or
well, they're, I'm it's over 400 pages, as you well know. It's a massive, massive work, and I finished writing it 4 or 5 years ago, so I can't remember exactly where everything is. But
I just mean in the context of that one banker, that Dutch banker.
yeah, well, no,
And
I'm talking about the division of the bad guys. There's wolves and there's serpents out there, and there's sheep. And I talk about that and write about that somewhere. Uh,
yeah.
it's hard to recall and pin down exactly where everything is that I wrote
Oh,
about.
oh no, it's a huge
The
work.
serpents are these bad guys and gals, whatever,
Yeah.
that really are um, directed with no ethics and morality to what they do. They're the sheep. Then there are wolves that are predatory to make money. It's not necessarily a spiritual thing, but just a financial thing to make money. They're the wolves, and then the sheep are the rest of the world that have to go along with being taken advantage of by the serpents and the wolves.
Do you think there are serpents at the head of these spheres of influence, industrialists, bankers, arms traders?
Not everyone that's in these power positions, Tanner, is reflective of that by any means, because I would not want to denigrate the leaders, the majority of the leaders through history, especially today in America and in our traditional history, to be predators by any stretch of the imagination. Especially in America, what our economic prosperity has come from is that we have had freedom, we have had creativity amongst people that have come up with a new idea and put together companies that provide a great service, a great product, and have provided great jobs and security and satisfaction for the majority of the workers through the decades and centuries in our own society. The bringing together of these economic entities and giants. So by no means are all of them, or even most of them, considered to be predators, but as and when and if they have become that and their corporations have become that, they need to be called out.
So regarding economic prosperity, on page 292, you quoted George Washington, who you say you regard him as somewhat of a prophet. He said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports." He claimed that neither reputation nor life itself is secure when people fail to be religious fully and sincerely. How do you think that he would define political prosperity when he wrote those words? What is the
Well,
definition of political prosperity?
yeah, I believe
And
what he means is governmentally that we are free and open. And I would consider today there is not political prosperity when there appears to be so many questions about the 2020 and 2022 elections. It is not politically prosperous in America, which relates to strength, richness, when we have so much question about the counting and the ballots and the computers and et cetera. All the questions related to all of that. We're not politically prosperous when there has to be that many questions about what the heck's been happening.
then the fallout, the division that it's created among the citizenry,
Yeah,
where
right.
I feel like we're just boiling with dissent as a people. Have you seen it this divided in your life?
Well, I mean, I guess you have to be a mature adult to be able to have the insight and the wisdom and the discernment to recognize and totally understand what all is happening. Because in our earlier years, unless we have free time, we're just concerned about our career and raising our kids. And it takes mellowing, it takes learning, it takes exposure and knowledge to grasp the totality of what everything means, good and bad in our society, and the different banking, all the different topics that I talk about, have my own chapters on, to understand. Yeah. That's why this book is probably very, very good for people at any age, just like you, much younger than I, to understand and recognize, because you read this, the different issues that you've had some past background in and knowledge and understanding already, but this is kind of added to it.
It is certainly that. Yeah, it's been an education for me, definitely. I know your time's about up. One quick comment. So you opened up the discussion on your chapter titled Connecting the Dots with sort of a disclaimer, basically whereby you say you're not suicidal, you're a defensive driver, and if anything happens to you, we'll know that the truth in this book was the reason. Was that sincere?
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that people who are whistleblowers have what's called a kill switch. They have their testimony and their evidence on record, videotape or records dispersed throughout the world, so that if anything happens to them or their family, the things that somebody might want to shut them up on will be automatically and immediately disclosed publicly. So that protects their lives. Now, I do not have a kill switch anywhere. All I have is my life as a disabled veteran who served his country, hopefully loyally served my country, and peacetime and war, and have loved the United States of America to a great extent, and believe in what we were originally created about, and am very, very disgusted and displeased with what in the world is happening in our country today. And the combination of all of that is part of what prompted me to write this book originally, and to really call out the bad guys and gals, the people that are doing these different things in the different categories and societies and historically. And in no uncertain terms, I am committed to the thesis of this book and what I wrote about, and expression of my displeasure of how certain elements in our society historically, the millennia, have taken advantage of the little people. And that has made me deeply distressed and angry, because I am a populist. I am a person of the people, and that is to take care of us. I have great respect and caring and liking for the little people of our society that have made things work throughout history, and especially in the engine of American society. The people that do the work, not just the people that trade stocks and run the different funds that they call the hedge funds and make their money in finance. Okay, that's all well and good. And I've been involved with finance. I have an MBA, Chartered Financial Analyst certificate, so I'm aware of all that. I know those arenas. I worked in an oil company. I worked in a bank. I worked in a trust investments department. I've been a real estate broker. So I understand at the very low level these different industries and so forth. But overall, I'll be candid, I'm very disgusted with where we are today, and I just hope and pray that we as a country and a world can have enough of us to grasp the understanding of faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and what he taught us, and to come to the fore collectively, spiritually, and take our country back to where we were really a shining city on a hill, which we no longer are. And so many people put upon and taken advantage of, and not reflective of what good integrity and ethics and morality would reflect in this land. We are significantly saddened and pulled away from all of that,
Given what you know about the unfolding of future events according to your faith, the biblical narrative, Do you think that these little people that you advocate for have any hope of recourse or political influence? How would you direct them
Well,
politically?
the only way we can have any political influence is to put in office people that really care about the United States of America and freedom, and care about keeping us out of endless wars, and having a solid expenditure program, and uh, not being dependent upon the government as the big brother, and caring about ourselves and taking care of ourselves individually better, and keeping strong the true values of America. And that's what it's all going to hinge on.
Do you have any hope that that's actually going to happen before the end, or you think it's just going to get increasingly worse until
Well, it depends on what happened in the 2024 election.
Is there anyone you advocate for as far
Well,
as
I've been a Trump supporter since the very beginning, 2015. Sure. I mean, he's the one that I see on the scene that is the best guided to get us financially straight, and to close the border again, and to be very careful about endless wars, but to also be very aware of the threats of the world, and to keep us strong militarily, which is necessary to be a deterrent to the bad guys in the world, and to keep us as straight in the country as we can be. And I know he has had apparently some moral failures, but there has been an unmerciful attack by his enemies to take him down and to keep him out of office again. And anyone else would have dropped out by now and said, I'm going to go play golf the rest of my life. I'm not going to worry about this. Let America go in. I got plenty of money. I can't be bought. I want to go ahead and enjoy the rest of my life. But he hasn't done that. He said, I want to stay involved, and I want to get back in public office. And one of the things that there's looming on the positive side is this former Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who's a retired Army officer, that I would like to see as vice president of the United States as a candidate running with Trump in 2024.
I guess Bobby Kennedy's son has announced his run for presidency. Did you align yourself with the views of the Kennedys at the time when you were fighting in Vietnam?
Well, there was one Kennedy by the time I went to Vietnam. There was one dead, obviously the president. Robert F. I didn't really know very much about, and this Kennedy candidate is great on the anti-vaxxer aspect, but there are other political aspects that are anathema to me, and no way I'd ever support him. He's in the right party to be the candidate that he wants to be and that he is.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the forthrightness there. That was really more for me. I probably won't publish any of that political specificity.
Well, that's okay if you want to do that. I don't mind. I mean, I'm delighted to be where I am, and maybe some of your listeners will pay attention to that and say, well, it makes sense, with what Alan's been saying. So I'd be glad. You can leave that on.
I'll think about it.
Well, if anybody wants to take me out because of that, so be it. I've lived a great life. The Lord loves me. I know I'm going to heaven, period. Because if you know the end result of your life, everything in between is just being an actor on a stage.
Yeah. An actor on a stage. That's how I view a lot of this as theater.
Yeah.
The charades, the divisiveness of these prominent political figures and the way they're trickled through the media and the influence they have. Yeah. My hope is in Christ. He's my king.
Yeah.
Everybody else freaks me out.
That's all that matters. Well, it's been a wonderful opportunity to have this develop a friendship, number one. Number two, to have all this great conversation and dialogue, and to give such a great coverage to this book that I've got a lot of heart and soul and money and time and effort and emotion into. It's kind of my brings together everything I've felt and believed in my life and put it all together in this book. So
I've enjoyed it. I'm gonna be leaving it a If there's 5 stars, I don't know if it's 4 or 5. You're getting all the stars.
5 is the top.
Okay, I'm going to give you a 5-star review because
Thank
I
you.
mean it. I've enjoyed it, and I'll direct my audience to read this book as well and purchase it.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you, Tanner. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We did what America always does at our best. We led. We united NATO. We built a global coalition. We stood against Putin's aggression. We stood with the Ukrainian people. Tonight, we're once again joined by Ukrainian's ambassador to the United States. She represents not just her nation, but the courage of her people. We're going to stand with you as long as it takes.
I will say this, even now, despite tremendous loss of lives and destruction of much of that country, I would have a peace deal negotiated within 24 hours. You could make a peace deal, you could make a deal for both right now, 24 hours. That deal could be done. That deal is waiting to be done, but there's nobody to do it.
I think that the general theme of my speech was this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is turning our country into a corporate kleptocracy, into a system of socialism for the rich, and this kind of a cushy socialism for the rich, and this kind of brutal, merciless capitalism for the poor. It keeps us in a state of war. It bails out banks at the same time that last month, the United States government told 30 million people it was cutting their their food stamp checks by 90%. It took 15 million people off of Medicare. The same month, it gave $300 million to the Silicon Valley Bank and tapped up the cost of the Ukraine war to $113 billion. We're sending $113 billion to the Ukraine. The entire budget of EPA is $12 billion. The budget of CDC is $11 billion. We have 57% of American citizens could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. A quarter of our citizens are hungry. So we're cutting welfare and food stamps by 90%. And we're bailing out the bankers. We're paying for a war that, we can't afford. And with the way that we do this is by printing money. We've printed 10 centuries of money in the last 14 years. And that caused the inflation, which raises food, which is a tax on the poor. We've raised food prices for basic foods like chicken, dairy, and milk by 76% in the last 2 years. And now we're cutting people's food stamps and bailing out banks the same month. It doesn't make any sense. And we need to get rid of this kind of corporate control of our government. It comes from our democracy is devolving into kind of a corporate plutocracy.
This episode of the Outskirts Podcast was brought to you in part by the Drifting Pinions Podcast. It's poetry and meditations on faith. If you're into that sort of thing, check it out.